Hello and welcome to the program. Today we are discussing short stories in this workshop edition of the show. There she is. Hey, what's up? How are you?
Nothing. I was rushing. I was rushing this morning.
Oh, well, you better start going to bed early.
I don't seem to ever go to bed early.
I know.
No, because I have a pot roast, so I needed to cook all day.
Oh, nice. That's like the most casual thing to do. You just sear the meat and then toss it in the thing.
Yeah, but I have to get it in so that it can be. It's not hard to do. I just needed to do it.
Yeah.
This morning.
That's all. Yeah.
It could like 8 hours.
Yeah, it's 10. It's 10 now though for you.
Yeah, but okay. I know. I know I'm ridiculous. We all know this.
It's fine.
I'm trying to clean up my office because it was making me unhappy. So, did you see my post about my piles of books?
Probably
Maybe
not.
I've been old book order. Thanks for supporting me.
It's not you. I've been a little occupied. I have not been sitting on Twitter as much as I should. I'll be honest with you. Where is our friend Jaji? I talked to John C. Wright yesterday, in fact.
That's nice.
And did a little interview with him.
How was that? Good?
It was good, yeah. It's nice.
He's a good talker. Yeah, I don't know where Jaji is.
She'll be here in a minute, I assume.
So how many... Anyway, no, so you can see my pile on my timeline.
I will look for it.
You can't... Anyway, so I had to buy another bookcase, and now I put a bunch of stuff in it, and now I have to take it all out because I need to move the bookcase over. Anyway, but my office is like, it's. I'm really glad I just did that. It's now far less annoying to be in here, and I moved some furniture around, and I have a nice little sitting area and a desk, and the dogs like to go under the desk. They like that a lot. They like to be under there. And they can charge the door if anyone comes near.
There she is.
Really loud. There she is.
Let's get her in here.
I'm very excited. I'm very excited about my somewhat reorganized office.
That's good.
Getting a bookcase.
I did something like that a few months back, and it has been just a fantastic payoff for that, to be honest with you.
Well, like order cannot be underestimated. It's relaxed.
It's so true. I think I've mentioned a couple months ago that my daughter moved out and I moved back into a room where I can do things like walk around my bed without knocking over a lamp.
Huge.
Wow.
It's so joyful. I'm so glad you have this opportunity to improve your office situation.
Well, I'm a book hoarder. I admit I'm ridiculous. I won't, and I'm like, I have this terrible thing where it's like, I feel like if I see like a really nice book and I love, I don't know about you guys, but I love walking around like the thrift stores and the vintage stores and the antique stores. And, that's a mixed blessing. But when I see books that have been, displaced, and I'm like, I must save this book.
Oh, that's great.
So I'm a book hoarder.
I used to have a house full of books. We had 15 bookshelves. And for reasons that I'm not going to go into, we had to throw out all our bookshelves.
Oh.
Now we have like 2. And it's so frustrating. Our books are just sitting quietly in boxes in a storeroom.
Oh,
so one of my goals is eventually, I've been slowly like bringing back a bookshelf here, a bookshelf there. We got a new one recently, so it's someday I'm going to get them out again.
Should I not ask what happened to the bookshelves, or?
I'd rather not explain the whole thing for reasons that would be clear if I explained it. But I'll just say that at the time we thought we were moving. And we thought we were going to move in, like we and my mom were both going to sell our houses and move in together. Yeah. And we were going to get all new bookshelves. So we thought, okay, because of this, we have to do this. Well, okay, we won't worry about it. But then that other thing didn't happen for reasons that were entirely out of our control. And so here we are.
Yeah. Okay.
And if we had moved, the moving situation would have also included money that could have gotten bookshelves, but the not moving situation has not. So it's a slow process. I actually have 2 nice spots to put bookshelves in now. So I will hopefully in the next couple of 6 months or so, at least get 1 or 2 more. But
it's hard, man. I like to find them. Tell us when you want us to get rolling for real, Ryan.
Oh, anytime.
Okay, well, I'll stop then. But yeah, no,
bookshelves is related to books.
I try to find them. I try to find them on Nextdoor or wherever, but I had to pony up and buy something off Amazon because I literally just could not. Nobody's selling bookshelves. Everywhere I went, I could not.
Well, the IKEA Billy bookshelves are my favorite because they have a little thing on the bottom where they fit over the molding. I love those. And they're not too expensive. You just have to.
No, that's not too bad.
For today, we are discussing short stories, a little workshop, as it turns out. So, as we have been promoting and preparing over the last few weeks since, we started talking about, we're putting together this anthology collection of short stories. We felt it would be valuable to discuss the production, the construction, the processing involved in making short stories. So that's going to be the focus for today. I'm doing short stories fairly exclusively, and for me, it's basically a way of keeping up with output, being able to turn anything out. Fiction is new for me. And I admire you guys that are turning out books because it is a massive undertaking. And I don't necessarily know that I have the capacity for it broadly or specifically, but short stories, I can chip away at little bits at a time. I can kind of get going on it. And eventually, it's there. So, Jaji, I'm sure you have not only edited, but written a great number of short stories. And Heidi, you are getting into short story writing. You are probably the freshest off the bench in regards to writing a short story. So maybe between the both of you guys, let's start at the beginning and discuss the benefits of short stories.
Well, actually, what I did this week was write a short story.
Nice. Hey, poignant.
Someone online invited me to write a Amelia short story in the background of the Pathways character. So I did. I wrote a little short story that was like inspired by the little video I made where my main character gets recruited by Amelia. And it was really interesting because it's not really on short stories per se, but I'll try to say it in one sentence. When you write about your own main character, usually your main character is the focus of the story. And it was interesting to have to take a step back and say, okay, my main character is the viewpoint, but this story has to be making the other girl look good. So I can't just have my main character do everything. So, it was interesting. And what the most interesting thing I thought was I wrote the whole story and then I got to the end and I thought, wait, in a short story, I usually make it so the character's wrong about something and they find out by the end they're wrong. So you have really simple character development along with the it gives you your second thread for your story. So in about 2 minutes, I went back, added 4 lines, and managed to have my character be wrong about something that the other person was right about and learn better, But I was amused that it could do it retroactively in 4 lines rather than having to plan it out. But it was because it was a fault that my character had established from, other things. So it was easy to put in. But that brings up the point that when you write a short story, you want something short, you want something that works together, but you do want some other line, something else going on. And one of the easiest things is if you establish something your character thinks that's incorrect, by the end of the story, they can find out the truth. You have a nice counterpoint to your main action without it taking a lot of time.
Yeah. I think for me, as we outlined, the other day in the prep session. It is about exploring the getting your brain turned on, the creativity aspect of understanding how to explore the format, but predominantly for me, I've only done a few of these at this point. I'm not prolific in that sense. So kind of getting to touch on different genres, some different styles of stuff. And for me, most valuably, because of the ebook and audiobook versions, it's building portfolio. I don't know how you guys feel about that, but that is kind of my thinking around it.
I completely agree. In the old days, and I realize they're gone, but in the old days, the way most writers got published were in science fiction and fantasy they'd write for one of the very popular back then science fiction and fantasy magazines. They'd write a few things and they'd get noticed, and then someone would ask them for a novel. And this is exactly what happened to my husband. He wrote 2 novels. He'd sent them around, including to Tor, and nobody paid any attention to them. But he had a short story come out that got a lot of attention. And we went to a convention, and one of the popular authors at the time said, "Oh, you're John Wright? Dave Hartwell's looking for you." And sure enough, the Tor editor, not the one who'd turned down his book, came and said, "Hey, do you have a novel?" And he's the guy who was John's editor until he passed on. That was how it used to go for most writers. Nowadays, the situation's entirely different with indie and people not reading, magazines the way they used to and things like that. But that used to be the process. And the nice thing about it was you kind of perfected your craft by writing short stories. And that led to your ability to write something longer. My husband wrote a short story a week, I think for 15 weeks. I don't remember exactly how many. And eventually so that was in the 90s? Yeah, it was in like the early 90s. So eventually within the time since then, so we'll say 30 years, he sold basically all of them.
That's excellent.
But it took a long time, and a lot of them, didn't sell until after he was already had a book out, and like somebody we know would say, "Hey, do you have a short story for an anthology?" And he'd go, "Oh yeah, I have one I haven't sold yet," And so they all got placed. But that was the way writers used to develop. And I think nowadays there's other paths people take. They write fan fiction and then they decide they want to write something real, or they just start with a novel. But I think the short story is still a very valuable learning tool. Particularly, it's a good way to learn to actually, you have to come up with a plot and then show your plot and then conclude your plot. I think it's a great thing to learn to do before you write a novel, even though it's not wrong to do it in another order.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Heidi. Yeah.
I would agree, obviously, but yeah, no, because that's kind of what I did. I wrote one for the anthology, so it's short, for me. She says embarrassingly because it's just under 9,000 words, so I'm in the zone at the high end, but
That's short to me.
Yeah,
So
right.
I must admit, the one I just wrote came in a tad under 7,000, which may be one of the shortest stories I've ever written. But that sounds good. I would consider that a short story. 9,000.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah, but it's like the thing is, you make good points. That's one of the things that you can do is to me you're and we talked about this too. It's like you're focusing on one theme, basically. You're focusing on one sort of arc. But as you pointed out, there needs to be something subtle going on, but you can't, go off on a tangent with characters or anything, with side characters. You need to stay focused on that one arc. And I think that's super important to consider. The other thing that I discovered too is like the same thing you were just saying, is it's like when you're writing a novel, when you're writing something large, you want to spend some time developing an idea or developing the character point, like what you were talking about. You needed your character to learn something. And I think that's a good way to approach it, because that's exactly the story I put together. It's, the character changes she understands. It's not so much that, I don't think so much that she's changing her mind. It's that she has a greater understanding of what it is that she's doing. I'll just put it like that, right? She had narrowed it down to what, one thing, when really there was more nuance, or so we'll say, to what she was doing. But the thing that's interesting I found with a short story is really one sentence, as you're pointing out, here or there. You have to use a lot of restraint and condense down your concepts as much as possible, because you have a shorter space. And plopping in, like you said, you went back, it's like I had to add this sentence here or there. That's really an important tool for this. It's like, on the micro level of writing it, it's one sentence here or there gives the reader what they need in this context, where it could be like an entire chapter in a novel. You're just condensing the whole frame down, I think.
Right. Yeah. I say she's wrong, but I'm not actually correctly putting across what I try to do. And I'm not claiming I did it in this particular story. It was a little simpler. But what I mean when I say is that I usually try to present the character's viewpoint to the reader, so that the reader also thinks the thing. So that the reader accepts for this story the premise that the character has. So the reader gets to realize they're wrong also for having accepted that. To give an example, I have a short story where a girl really, really, really hates these robots that killed her parents. And by the end of the story, she realizes that her hatred is wrong. But I think the average reader reading the story is going to just buy the premise of, oh, these guys are so evil, oh, blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? And so the reader also gets to go, oh, wait, maybe I shouldn't be so prejudiced about these robots or whatever, as they go along. You know what I mean? So it's kind of fun to do. I didn't need to do anything that fancy in this particular story. But you're talking about, the shortness of it. I really was, the focus, I really was thinking about that. The previous short story I wrote a week or two ago, which I owed to someone who had backed a short story in a Kickstarter. I didn't bother doing what we normally do. Normally we, hone it and try to kick out anything extra. This one, I didn't need to do that because it was for a fan. I could put in little extra Easter eggs and have characters show up at the end that had never been mentioned before, because the reader would know who the character was, because it's part of a greater thing. And it was kind of liberating and fun to be able to write a short story like that. But it was also interesting because I would know it as I did certain things. If I was writing this for a different market, I wouldn't do this, or I would have left this out. Because normally you want it to be focused and you want everything to be set up. And if somebody didn't know your background, you wouldn't want a, angelic creature to show up at the end that had never been hinted at. That would be Deus Ex Machina. But if it's part of a background where that character is very well known by the reader, you can get away with it. So I think that most short stories are not going to be like the one I just wrote. They're going to be focused, one subject, hints at other things. Perhaps you can put in little Easter eggs, that you're like, if you're writing a short story for a general audience, but it's in a background you've written before, you can put in a line or two that'll mean something to your specific readers that the general ones won't get, but you don't want anything to rely on that. You just want it to be a little throwaway lines or a little bit that, that makes the other reader smile, but it's not anything. You don't want a normal reader to feel like they're missing out. You want them to have a good experience reading the story. So it needs to be on point.
Absolutely. And here's another note, because I feel like we're kind of headed into the part of the discussion about structure. That's what I'm perceiving. I think that is a valuable aspect in regards to some of the things you guys were saying. As far as word count, you have to be efficient, right? And you have to be focused and you have to drive the story forward. Not necessarily that it needs to be all action, but you do need to advance your reader within, a respectable pace because of that word count. In the meantime, Robin, you've come up to stage. We do appreciate you. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you.
We saw your submission. We saw your query.
Yeah. Hopefully it'll work out right. It's funny with this short story. I find that I guess I'm saying what other people are saying, maybe in a different way. I find that writing a novel, a longer piece, you feel like you have the luxury of time and of space, and you can flesh things out. With a short story, for me, it's a more intense, I would say more painful in a way, process, because everything has to be condensed. And I know you were saying that. Everything has to be condensed. You can't have anything extra. And for me, one of the starting points, which I have to figure out in every short story, is getting the right point of view. Is it first person? Is it third person? And like Jaji says, are you in the character's head? Are you not? And for me, that's very, very important for a short story, because if you do that wrong, it can, even though you have the right intent, it can go off the rails. Yeah. And the other thing that I wanted to say, just real quickly on another subject, because you guys all helped me with this, is I decided last week to withdraw my submission for my novel to that magazine. And I sent them a letter, and they sent me a confirmation. And I felt very relieved when I withdrew my submission, because now I'm submitting my first novel to small presses, which is what I had intended.
Great.
Glad to hear that. Your comment about point of view reminded me that a day or so ago, my husband suddenly announced, my next book, I'm going to write in fifth person. Every sentence is going to start. I heard from a guy who heard from another guy.
Oh, that's funny.
There's actually a song, an Irish drinking song that has that in it that I really love.
Heard it from a friend who heard it from a friend who.
Yes, exactly. But so talking of structure, basically you have an opening, and that's true for a novel too. But in a short story, you want to hit off running. You want to get off to it. I'm not saying that at the beginning of a short story necessarily has to be action. Some short stories are mood pieces, but you want to get whatever it is you're trying to put on stage right away. So you're drawing the reader in, and then you have your middle, where you have your whatever the actual action and progress is, and then you want to draw it to an ending. And we've talked in our household here for years about the so what endings. That so many short stories, you get to the end and you go, so what? And they don't really say anything. So one thing you want to do is try to conclude your short story in such a way that the reader feels that it was worth the time, that they don't go, well, so what? In other words, it's not just a slice of life. It's not just a vignette. It's actually a plot that has some motion to it, because a person can write a beautiful vignette, but that's not a short story. I could write, or I bet you that Michael could write a wonderful vignette about going to a national park and how beautiful it was and the sunset and the mountains, but that's not a short story, even if it was very pleasant to read. And for a short story, he would add in conflict and the other things that a short story needs. And so I think that's something really important to think about when you work on a short story, that there has to be some kind of motion to the structure. It can't just be an idea. My husband and I, in the early days, back in the time when he was writing all those short stories, we found that we would try to make up a story, and we weren't that good at it back then because we were just starting. We found that the reason I always talk about two strings, two threads, is we found out that our short stories would only come to life. We would only be able to write them when we got the second idea. So your first idea might be, I don't know, Man on the Moon, but it's only when you come up with your second idea, which is his dog is missing or something. You know what I mean? You need two ideas, two different things that are going on. And that's when the the structure begins to move. That's when the story begins to come into existence. And I think that's the difference between a vignette and a short story. In a vignette, one thing is going on, a description of a beautiful day or a scary night or whatever. And in a short story, a second thing is happening that's producing emotion from the first thing to whatever the conclusion is.
Well, yeah, I mean, I would just second the concept of the ending. And I think this applies to anything. You know, if you have a crap ending, just to be blunt, it kills the whole story regardless of how good it is. That's what I think. Yeah, I'm gonna stand by that because I've seen that. I've seen books where it's like, you know, it's a really interesting idea and they get going, but they don't go anywhere at the end. They just sort of try, you know, they sort of, I don't know, what do you want to say, trail off. And again, if you think of a short story as a condensed version of everything, one of the things when you condense it all down, it's all the same pieces, but when you condense it all down, it's much easier for someone to see. So in some ways, they're a little bit harder to write. I mean, we think, oh, it's less words, so I can do this faster. It's like, well, yeah, but to do it well, you have to be precise and you have to be paying attention to all those details. So like I can read an entire novel and if the ending's a little bit squishy, it's like, you know, you don't think so much because maybe you really liked everything else going on in it. But with a short story, if you don't land it, I mean, it's like everything is revealed. I mean, I'm trying to think of a good metaphor, you know, it's you know, you know, it's like, you know, yeah, I can't think of a good metaphor that doesn't involve the striptease, so I'm going to leave it at that.
Hello.
Yeah.
You get what I mean, right? It's like it's all there, and you know everyone can see it. It's very easy for everyone to see. So I mean, it shouldn't put you off of doing it. In some ways, they are easier because you can do it faster. You absolutely can write a short story much faster than an entire novel.
One of the fun things about being a editor of short stories is that it's a great way for a young person to jump into writing. In the last couple of months, the current Fantastic Schools that's about to come out, it's at the Typesetter. It's called Fantastic Schools University, has the first published short story of my youngest son. It's called Draconian Murder College. It's a kind of humorous piece. And I just was able to accept for an upcoming volume a short story by the girl who's the leader of his writing club that he's in at college. And she's actually in Rome, studying in Rome this semester, but she wrote a short story for us. And I haven't read it yet, but my co-editor loved it and actually asked if we could get her to write more. So, you know, it's just really a fun way to offer a young person an opportunity to do something. In one of our volumes, we actually had a short story by an 11-year-old. And I must admit, we had to send it back and forth with this young man several times before it actually formed a short story. And it wasn't just kind of a group of events that didn't quite make sense. But it was a joy to be able to include it. And his sister and brother also had stories in that volume. So it was their family had 3 stories in that same volume. And one of them was by the little kid. And that was just a really fun thing that you couldn't do with a novel. I mean, the quality wasn't up to not anybody would want to read a novel level, but it was good enough that it was a fun thing. We put it in the end and explained what it was, you know. So that's one of the things you can do with short stories is it's just an opportunity for someone who's starting out. You know, if you're going to start out, it can be really hard to commit to writing, you know, 300 pages or whatever, you know, your novel length is going to be. But writing 10 pages, you know, a younger person can get a start and get some encouragement that way. And you know, in some of these cases, the stories were quite good. So, you know, it's kind of a fun thing. I should send the relics information to the young woman whose story Chris liked. Because maybe she'll write one for that too.
Let's curtail the queries for now. I feel like we've got enough. We've got plenty. I don't know if you've looked in there recently, but
I haven't looked in the last couple of days.
Okay, well, a load on me responding just to, just in that outset. Plenty. We have,
Excellent,
I think, 13
Well,
stories right now. I mean,
Wow.
actual stories, not queries.
Right. And 13 is enough for an anthology. So, yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, I will not pass it on to anyone else then. But
Thank you.
It's in fact, we can just I told somebody yesterday, the day before, they could still send one, but we could say it's closed at this point.
That's why I'm bringing it up today again, because I was like, oh my God, Jaji, you're killing me.
Well, I thought it was one of our community and they, hadn't seen it. It's not their fault.
I don't blame them for missing it, but at the same time, it was open for over a week. We do the best we can.
Well, this is an interesting point on this. I'll say it's like, didn't we say we were originally going to have it open till May? So, I mean.
Yeah. I've actually never heard of anybody
No. We said we were going to have submissions for the stories is open till May.
Yeah.
We didn't say queries was open till May.
I've never been in a project before where we closed queries. It was always one thing that, whatever the deadline was, you could send a query or a story by that deadline. So I'm perfectly willing to do it. I have no objections. I understand. But I'm just saying it didn't occur to me that we were closing the queries because I've never seen that done. But I think under the circumstance, it's good. It's good. Under the circumstance, it's perfect because you don't want to keep them open if you've gone beyond what you need. So,
yeah, the thing is, I just don't want you guys to get overwhelmed when there's 50 stories in there to look at, and then,
absolutely,
and then you're like, hey, can you look at 50 stories? And I'm going to be like, I cannot look at 50 stories.
I would look at 50 queries, and that was all I could do.
As for today, let us move into.
I think a good turning point would be to focus on the different types of short stories that
Do you
are.
want to talk genre specifically? And maybe some of the obstacles that go along with that?
I was thinking style, where we discussed. Sure. One of the things, and I gave you that chart. Maybe you can grab it. So it was basically we were comparing the sort of I always want to say Harvey Dent. There's so many Dents in the world. There's
Lester Dent.
Harvey, Lester, Arthur. I don't know. There's too many Dents in my world. So there's the Lester Dent method, right, which we've discussed in other writers' blocks. But then the thing that I would, and that is, your hard-hitting action story where it's just beat. And that was the chart that I posted up there, and I can't do it from my PC to my phone, and just bear with me. So
I can see it if you want me to read it really short. Quickly.
Yeah, I'm looking right at it.
Okay, so there's elements: the core engine, the conflict, the structure, pacing, ending, and reader takeaway.
Correct.
And the Dent version, which I'm going to do first because it's kind of the more straightforward action, is action for core. Conflict is physical. Structure is escalation, peril, and victory. Pacing is fast and rhythmic. Ending is a problem solving, and the reader takeaway is satisfaction and relief. And then the Clark version.
Now let's set that up. Now this is based on a short story by Arthur C. Clarke called Meeting with Medusa. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. It's like a really perfect example of sort of the revelation engine of a short story as opposed to the action engine, right? So if you want to go through it,
is revelation. The conflict is existential. The structure is descent, encounter, silence. The pacing is slow and deliberate. The ending is meaning shifts, and the takeaway is humility and awe. And I think that's, it's a good analysis, I'm sure, of the original story. But I would say that while the first one fits action stories quite well, the second one, you can have eucatastrophe style short stories that have a much more positive kind of up to them than this description. I'm not saying the story itself. I'm in other words, silence and things like that is not necessarily the end of a revelation story. But the idea is that some types of short stories are kind of revealing something, and magical realism might fall into this category. And then some short stories are about, oh my gosh, he's shooting at me, I'm going to go left, and they're very active. They're very just straight physical fighting and solving a problem and running here and spies and wars and things like that. So they're kind of the basic short story types. The one type is very immediate, and the other type is doing something a little more complicated, a little more artsy, or a little more literary, or so that I think gives you the basics of your short story types.
Yeah, I mean, and then and the thing is, it's not a matter of one being better than the other, and it's just a matter of understanding that these are style options, and it really depends on your story, the way you go. For me, I mean, I probably tend to always land in the revelation zone. I will, and that doesn't mean you don't have action. So this is the interesting thing. I would again, this if you guys haven't read it or listened to the audiobook, it's probably an hour-ish to listen to, but the Arthur C. Clarke story, Meeting with Medusa, it's just brilliantly structured, and there is action in it. It opens with a dirigible crashing to the ground. So, I mean, it opens in an action scene within, moments, that just starts up where this dirigible is blown up and all these things. But the whole story is more about an experience and a revelation where he goes off to this planet and he's exploring and he's seeing like these creatures, in the stratosphere. So, and then you get to the end and you get this sucker punch that you weren't expecting, that I'm not going to give away because it's just so good. I just can't tell you guys how good this story is. Go read the story. Just drop everything. But so that's the style that he did it, and then with the, and then there's, there you can, and I think really it depends on the style that you like to write. It's not like you have to say I'm writing a revelation style story, and so I have to stick to these beats. You don't have to. The idea is you can combine all of these things. It can be mythic. I mean, there's, it's not one or the other per se. It's really about what fits the thing you want to say in your story. And maybe it's a combination. And I would argue that most stories are not just purely one thing. Maybe there are some Lester Dent stuff because that is an action-based design, and that feeds itself to being that way where it's just boom, boom, boom. But and I think Louis L'Amour is a really good example of that. I mean, his pacing is fast and it's done really well if you've ever read any of his like short novels. But there's more stuff going on in there. He takes moments here and there to breathe. But he never drops the pace. So it's always a little bit of a combination. I mean, the idea of just something being utterly, purely this. I mean, it's. I think it's always just sort of mostly this, and you can look into other types of stories that that people, other styles. It's all sort of based. I think those are the two main sort of engines. Wouldn't you agree? Behind a story, a short story.
Yeah, and I completely agree that if you imagine, for just say for the moment, Lester Dent at one side and some, extremely magical, realistic South American mood writer at the other side, not people like both of these. I'm not insulting either of them. Majority of stories, as you say, fall somewhere in between. They might have some of one and some of the other, or they might, but it's some writers only write one style of story, like they're all action or they're all mood or something like that. Other writers jump around, and they might have a lot more mood in one story and a lot less in another. And there's no right or wrong. It's just that these are two different approaches, and they have slightly different audiences. There are audiences that really want their stories to be quick moving, fast paced action. And there's audiences who really love a good, slow moving mood type thing. And they're going to enjoy like, I've heard, you'll see people complain, oh, the descriptions in this writer's work are way too long. And then I have a friend who that's what he loves. He loves these extremely long, slow stories that have long descriptions that he just luxuriates in. So, you just, some styles may have only a few people out there who like that, and some may have a lot of people out there that like that. But the fact that it's only a few doesn't make it wrong. Those few might be really happy to read your story because it really fits what they want in a story, So, marketing and issues aside, there's no wrong or right on this issue as to, and I should say, when we're talking about revelation and mood, we're not saying again that you're just writing a vignette. It's still a short story. It's just a short story where the motion is much more intellectual or emotional or something like that, rather than, the guy, it's a baseball game and is he going to win or isn't he going to win, with, very, clear and cut action to what's going on.
Robin, what popped in your head?
Yeah, I was thinking that you don't have to know what form you're using, whether you're writing like Lester Dent or whoever. I think for a lot of people, however they write a short story or a novel or whatever is sort of organic. You write the way you want, right? And you can sort of reverse engineer it and go back and say, oh, look, I didn't realize I write like Lester Dent. Or if there's a problem and you say something's not working here, then you can go back and say what kind of story structure is best for my story. But I don't think that it's necessarily a good thing to know beforehand how to write, the structure. I think you just write it.
I would agree with that. I think a lot of times write the story and then, I mean, I don't know if it's sort of reverse engineering, but I think when you sort of realize what
exactly,
you kind of go in and sort of work on the structure a little bit. Cassia, I see you there. I know you. You're Architect Older's friend. If you want to come up and talk, you're welcome. This is, it's a small space and everybody's friendly. Even Michael, I promise.
Yep.
He's pretty friendly.
Yep.
Right? Now he's mad at me.
Well, we can go now to what Michael had brought up earlier, which is genre. That short stories, that genre also has an influence on the way and the expectation of the reader in the short story. So, in other words, if you're writing a mystery short story, the readers are going to have an expectation. Either you're going to solve your mystery or you're going to do something where the mystery is unsolved and try to, occasionally I'm sure you can reverse expectations in a mystery story, but it's, you'd have to be pretty good writer to get away with it. But that's quite different than if you're writing a fantasy short story where you have a much kind of broader area, because some fantasy short stories are going to be based on wonder, but some of them are really, sometimes what we call fantasy is really just medieval setting, but not quite Earth's medieval setting. And there's not a lot of magic and wonder. So, that might be more a story of knighthood or some other thing like that, or kind of thing you might see in a video game. A lot of video games have that kind of fantasy setting, and the your problems are fighting bandits or fighting ogres or something like that. Science fiction short stories used to be all about the science, like they were actually presenting a scientific idea and exploring it. What if this was different? What if we had this? What if we had this little device that could do this thing? What if we could teleport? What if we could read minds? That type of science fiction is not as common now, because a lot of the basics have been done so much that science fiction tends to be a little bit more, a little broader, have a little more character development than it used to, and not just be only about a scientific premise. People still can. There's always new science moving forward. They're discovering new things. So, the moment something new comes along, like right now, they're working on trying to put the tiny little bits of antimatter they have, which are so small that it's minuscule, but they're trying to move it in a truck so that they can bring it from where they make it to a lab where they could do something else with it. And I'm sure that a good science fiction writer could write an interesting story about that, whether it was someone trying to hijack the truck, or whether however they wanted to do with what they're doing. There's new ideas coming from what they're discovering about the little bits of antimatter they have. So it's not like there's no new scientific short stories, but it's less of a motion than it was back when these things were all new to the public. And so science fiction is a little wider range now than it was. But for each type of genre, I'm sure there's genres beyond what I'm that familiar with. That there's various literary genres where the short stories have a different nature than I'm that familiar with. So.
Yeah, well, I mean, in terms of genre, again, it's like I sort of start with story first, and then I back engineer. What can I say? I don't know if that's standard, but that's what I do. Is there anything else we wanted to hit on, Michael? I feel like we can talk more about.
Yeah, there's plenty of stuff here, in the sense of I think we've been talking most predominantly about the kind of the progressive side of things, and maybe not necessarily the obstacles. And let's cover one that I think is memeable for many writers, is that, I was going to write a short story and now I've got a new series of novels in the works. The brevity, this is something that I think some people have an issue with. I am on the other side. I'm always under a short word count and trying to beef it up and kind of get to what I feel is a weighty enough word count for the material, or X, Y, and Z, the narrative and fleshing things out. I'm oftentimes adding things that I didn't outline, purely to kind of give a little bit more life, either to the world or the characters or the plot arc, things like that. But not everybody has that problem. A lot of people aren't trying to scrape together a couple of words the way I am.
I think you kind of have to find sort of what inspires you when it comes down to that. And, I don't think so much. I always think it's the wrong approach to think I want to say this. I think that's the wrong approach. I think the better approach, and I'm curious if you guys go the same way as me, but it's more, hey, I have this person in my mind. I'm very character driven in my writing. So I have this person in my mind, and she's very clinical. She's very orderly. She's very, like this. What happens if I take her and I remove all of the order from her life? What does she do? What happens to her in this scenario? She has everything planned out. She knows everything that's going to happen. What happens if I throw her into the scenario where she can't control it? I mean, so for me, it's more about reaction that's kind of my approach to, I think, stories. It's like, and John, we talked about this. It's like there's a problem. And when someone has, how do they deal with the problem? How do they solve the problem, or do they fail at solving the problem and find, learn from that? I mean, what is happening? It's sort of like, so, I mean, and that's a character driven style. I don't know. Not everybody is character driven. I know some people are more focused on events. There's different ways to write. There's different approaches. Not one isn't necessarily better than the other. But I think the thing to consider if you are writing is to figure out which one gets you into the story. And what I found is when I have it, for me, if I have a character, I present them with a problem. and then the theme starts to appear after that. It's like, it appears from what you've learned. When I was in nursing school, one of the things they said is like, we drill you and drill you and drill you on all of these things, so that at one point, and the instructor said this, and I think it was good, at one point it's in your blood. It's just part of you. It's your DNA at some point, where your reaction to the situation is is baked into who you are. And I think this is true too of military, where you're so drilled into certain scenarios and protocols. And there's some good to that, but there's bad to that too. But on the good side of it is, it's like your reaction is based on what you're built of. And to me, this is where, like, what you've read and what you think and what you've experienced in your life is sort of the built-in parts. That's your bones, that's your DNA, that's your blood, and that's what you're putting into the story. When you see the problem, when you have this character, that's their problem to solve. Um, and you respond to it based on what you what you've built yourself on. What does that And I think that is the best approach, is to think of it that way. I don't think, I mean, I have a lot of philosophical stuff, she says. I'm trying not to say this like I'm really philosophical. This isn't my point. But I was a philosophy major. I've done a lot of different stuff, so it's baked into me. So it comes out, I notice when I'm writing, whether I realize it or not. So again, this comes back to what you're putting in is what you're going to be building from. It's like nutrition, think about that. That's one thing I would say about writing, is it's like you're made of, you are what you eat. So that's one thing I would say in terms of putting together story.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
It's really strange because while my mic is open, it has a closed mic symbol under my name. That's I was worried. That's like, anyway. Yes, I agree with you. And I do think that these things can be true. Like, one writer can do it this way, another writer can do it another way. And also one writer can do it different ways. I have a story that the idea for it came to me in 2014, but it didn't come with a character. It was just an idea. The idea was of somebody who lived in a madhouse, or a very situation where they were told they were crazy, but the things that they had said when the period where they were supposed to be crazy were actually true. And it took me, I don't know, like 5 or 7 years to find, maybe even longer, to find a character to go with it and a situation. And I eventually was able to write it, and at least a few people have really liked that story. And it didn't come out quite the way I originally pictured it, but I managed to get across the what I wanted to get across. Where there was a character. I had to make it not the main character. I had to make it a secondary character who was the one going through this, because it was easier to lead the character, to see as if the character was in fact crazy if you weren't doing it from her point of view. But it's just an example of the fact that often I start with a character. Okay, I want to write a story about one of Miranda's brothers. I'm going to try to make up something that can go with that, which is what I'm thinking I'm going to do for the Relic story. But at other times it's something like this, where I just had this image of this character who's hearing these horns in the distance, and everybody tells her she's crazy, and she's actually the fairy princess, and she's been kidnapped, and the fairies are trying to get her back, which is not the version I actually wrote, but that was my original idea. And so that came first, and I didn't even know at first if I was going to make it a male or a female, but that was an idea. So sometimes you get your idea first. Sometimes you have a setting. Oh, I want to put a story in this place I went to in Scotland. Or sometimes you might have, oh, I really want to write a story about an Olympic event. So you have a plot event of, this guy is, I thought this was really interesting that this happened to this guy. What am I, I'm going to make that what happens to my character in my story. And then you pick who to go with it. So I think the approach can be different, and the same author might start one point from how can I bring chaos into the life of my organized character, and another time they might start from, oh, this interesting thing happened in our town or at the Olympics or during this meeting or whatever. I want to make a story where I'm gonna use that in my fictional background. So you can approach it from all different points of view, and none of these are, is that is it 460 Ways to Write Tribal Lays? I think it's a Kipling poem about how there's a million different ways to write stories and approach these things, and none of them are wrong. They're all going to make something. Well, I won't say they necessarily all come out right, but they all have the potential to be good.
Very good. We've had a nice discussion today, but we're going to have to wrap it up. So, as it is for today, this has been the first installment of our workshop series on short stories. We've got the based book anthology called Relics coming out some point in the future. We've got a slew of stories already. Robin's got one coming in, and I'll be honest with you, the query was fun to read. I liked the octopus scenario that you had laid out there.
Let's see if I can get the right point of view.
Let's see if she can pull it off.
I'll try.
No, I liked it. The further I got into the query, the more I liked it.
Well, maybe I'll just submit that as the short story. No, I'm kidding. That's a little too sparse.
That's too short. I'd like to read more. Thursday, we've got the Film 3 space with Chris Hackett. He'll be hosting. Next week on Tuesday, Heidi will be hosting the Writer's Block, so keep your eyes peeled for that to pop up. I would say Thursday we'll get that scheduled. And then as for today, we do appreciate you hanging out with us and spending time. And this has gone well. We will talk again before too long.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you guys. I hope this was of use.